Kess had lived her entire 23 years, believing humans were the galaxy's janitors. Today, floating in hard, vacuum 30 meters from an alien warship without so much as a pressure suit, she was starting to think the textbooks might have gotten a few things wrong. The Velkash corvette hung in space like a metallic insect, all angles and aggressive curves. Through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, she could see Captain Thos and his crew staring at her in what she was beginning to recognize as that particular alien expression of absolute terror. She'd been cleaning the station's outer hull when the raiders showed up. Standard job for a human refugee, they said. Humans were expendable, they said. Good for dangerous work in the void. Kess touched the small comm unit grafted behind her ear. The modification let her survive in vacuum for about 40 minutes. Most aliens considered it a death sentence. Most aliens didn't understand that when you grow up in recycled air and artificial gravity, your lungs learn to hold more than they should. Her comm crackled with familiar voices from inside Drayton Station. Dr. Maya Chen's precise tones cut through the static first, her words rapid and clinical as she coordinated the station's emergency protocols. Behind her, Kess could hear Commander Jonas Reeves, though he insisted everyone just call him Jonas, his diplomatic training evident even in crisis as he attempted to establish communication with the Velkash fleet. 3 voices that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had written them off as evolutionary dead ends. Movement caught her eye. 3 more Velkash ships emerging from hyperspace, sleek and predatory. The raiders had been hitting human settlements across the sector, looking for something. Today, they'd found Drayton Station. The station's defense grid was down. 18,000 souls aboard, mostly human refugees and a few alien sympathizers. The kind of place the galaxy preferred to forget existed. Kess pushed off the hull with her fingertips, drifting closer to the corvette. The Velkash were accomplished pirates, but they were evolved from a desert world. Arid, safe, predictable. They'd never learned to hunt in 3 dimensions with death on all sides. Through her comm, she heard Maya's voice grow tight with concentration. Kess, your biometrics are showing vacuum exposure. What's your status? Working, Kess replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The comm's bone conduction system meant she didn't need to waste air speaking. Working on what, exactly? This from Jonas, and she could picture him in the station's command center, his dark eyes focused on the tactical display, while his mind calculated political ramifications 3 moves ahead. Captain Thos was speaking rapidly into his comm system now, probably calling for instructions. The Velkash were methodical, bureaucratic in their cruelty. They followed protocols even when raiding defenseless stations. 30 meters. 25, Kess reached into the tool belt around her waist and pulled out a plasma cutter. The kind used for precision work on station hulls. Completely civilian equipment. Absolutely harmless. She'd modified it herself, working late nights in the engineering bays with Maya, learning to see possibilities where others saw limitations. The Velkash had thick hides. Natural armor evolved to stop projectiles and energy weapons. What they hadn't evolved to stop was a plasma beam calibrated to cut through military-grade starship hull plating. 20 meters. Through the observation deck, she could see Thos pointing at her, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. The other crew members were backing away from the transparent aluminum, their large eyes wide with something that might have been recognition. Maybe they were starting to remember the stories, the warnings their parents had whispered about the scattered children of the dead world. Kess. Barnabas's voice joined the comm channel, steady and graveled with age. The station's communications chief had seen Earth burn, had watched the great human fleet scatter like seeds on stellar winds. His presence on the channel meant things were about to get serious. I've got Fleet Commander Vextai demanding to speak with station authority. Jonas is stalling, but they won't wait much longer. 15 meters. Kess raised the plasma cutter. Not threatening, not yet. Just letting them see it. Letting them understand that something was wrong with this picture. The human was supposed to be hiding in the station, cowering behind whatever defenses they could muster. The human was not supposed to be here, in the void, hunting them. Maya, Kess said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that came from growing up where panic meant death. Remember that project we've been working on, the network integration protocols. A pause. Then Maya's voice, carefully controlled, the theoretical ones. Kess, those were never field tested. Today they get tested. 10 meters. The Corvette's engines started to fire. Too late. Kess had been born in zero gravity, raised in the spaces between stars. She knew how ships moved, how they thought, how they died. She triggered the plasma cutter and carved a perfect circle through the observation deck's transparent aluminum. Explosive decompression sent alien bodies tumbling into space. But Kess had already moved, magnetic clamps in her boots latching onto the Corvette's hull. The ship lurched as its crew fought for control, but she'd already found what she was looking for. Every Velcash ship had the same vulnerability. Their atmospheric systems were centralized, a single point of failure that made perfect sense on a world where the air was always breathable. It made no sense when your enemy had been breathing recycled atmosphere and filtered toxins since birth. Kess cut through the life support intake with 3 precise strokes. Then she reached into her tool belt and pulled out a small canister, industrial solvent used for cleaning atmospheric filters. Maya's voice crackled through the comm, understanding dawning in her tone. You're using the atmospheric contamination protocol. But Kess, the reaction time, I know. Kess cracked the seal and let the contents drift into the ship's air supply. 30 seconds to unconsciousness, 2 minutes to incapacitation. Maya, start the cascade sequence. The Velcash used a methane-oxygen mix. The solvent would react with the methane to produce something significantly less breathable. Through the hull, she could hear the ship's alarms. Emergency systems engaging, crew scrambling for breathing apparatus. But the panic in their voices told her everything she needed to know. They'd never drilled for this kind of attack. Jonas's voice cut through the calm chatter, diplomatically smooth even in crisis. Fleet Commander Vextai is threatening to destroy the station if we don't surrender immediately. I'm buying us time, but tell him, Kess said, pushing off the Corvette and drifting back toward Drayton Station, that he's about to learn something new about human refugees. Around her, the other Velcash ships were maneuvering, trying to get target locks. Their weapons systems were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not for tracking a single human in open space. Another evolutionary blindness. When you've never been prey, you never learn to hunt small, fast, dangerous things. Maya's voice carried a note of wonder mixed with terror. Kess, the network response is, it's bigger than we calculated. I'm reading system activations across 17 sectors. How much bigger? Every human settlement in known space just came online. Kess smiled as she drifted through the void, watching her wrist display light up with connection after connection. For 20 years, while the galaxy saw them as broken remnants, the scattered children of Earth had been building something the galaxy couldn't comprehend. They'd been building hope from desperation, weapons from tools, and unity from isolation. Jonas, she said, patch me through to the fleet commander. It's time for him to understand what he's really dealing with. The Velcash commander's voice filled her comm system moments later. Deep, resonant, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. This is Fleet Commander Vextai of the Velcash hegemony. You will return to your station immediately and prepare for boarding. Kess looked at the Corvette. Its engines were still firing, but erratically. The crew was probably unconscious by now, dead if they were unlucky. No, she said simply. The silence stretched for several seconds. You are in violation of hegemony space. Your resistance is futile. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Maya's voice whispered through the calm, excitement barely contained. Kess, I'm reading massive hyperspace signatures. The network isn't just activating, it's responding. Kess reached into her tool belt again. This time she pulled out a small transmitter, the kind used for coordinating maintenance work across multiple hull sections. But like everything else in human space, it had been modified, enhanced, adapted for purposes its original designers had never imagined. Fleet Commander, she said, you came here looking for something. What was it? Another pause. When Vextai spoke again, his voice carried a note of uncertainty. That information is classified. Kess smiled as she reached Drayton Station's approach vector. Through the station's viewports, she could see faces pressed against the transparent aluminum. Human faces, mostly, but also the elongated features of Antaran traders, the crystalline structures that passed for heads among the Zephyrians. All of them watching as one small human demonstrated why their species had once been feared enough to destroy. I think you were looking for this. She activated the transmitter. The response was immediate and breathtaking. Every piece of civilian equipment on Drayton Station suddenly came online with military precision. Maintenance drones moved like starfighters, construction mechs deployed with tactical awareness, atmospheric processors hummed with the kind of focused energy usually reserved for weapons systems. But more than that, much more. The transmitter was connected to a network Maya had been building for the past 5 years. Using communication protocols Jonas had negotiated into trade agreements, powered by infrastructure that Barnabas had quietly integrated into every human settlement's essential systems. For 20 years, the galaxy had seen humans as broken remnants, useful for dangerous work, but ultimately harmless. A species that had lost its home and never recovered. They'd been wrong. The children born after Earth's destruction had grown up in places where every breath was rationed, where every mistake meant death, where survival required adaptations that no planet-bound species could imagine. They'd grown up connected. Barnabas's voice filled the comm channel, years of careful planning evident in his tone. Kess, we're receiving acknowledgement signals from 47 systems. The dormant protocols are activating ahead of schedule. Maya, Kess said, pulling herself through Drayton Station's emergency airlock. What's our response time looking like? 18 minutes for the first wave. But Kess, Maya's voice carried a note of awe. It's not just our people responding. I'm reading non-human signatures. Lots of them. Through the station's tactical displays, Kess could see the truth of Maya's words. Human settlements across the sector were responding, yes, but they weren't alone. The Cathurian Expeditionary Force dropped out of hyperspace first. Sleek vessels that moved like living things, crewed by beings who understood what it meant to adapt or die. They'd been watching the human settlements for months, studying the children of the void. They'd seen potential. Behind them came the Mordek clans, warriors from the Galactic Rim who respected strength above all else. Their massive battle wagons looked primitive compared to Velkash technology, but Kess knew better. The Mordek had survived 3 extinction events by learning to see value where others saw weakness. Then the Tsavari Collective arrived, their modular ships reconfiguring in real time as they assessed the tactical situation. Traders by nature, they'd learned to profit from humanity's resilience, turning human adaptability into economic opportunity. Jonas appeared at her side as she stepped into the station's command center. His diplomatic uniform slightly rumpled, but his eyes bright with something between amazement and pride. The Antaran Council just transmitted formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty, he said. 3 other species are requesting immediate diplomatic contact. Maya emerged from behind a bank of monitors, her dark hair escaping from its practical ponytail. Her usually pristine lab coat stained with the kind of chemical residue that came from pushing experimental technology beyond its intended limits. Kess, the network integration is working better than our most optimistic projections. We're not just coordinating human settlements, we're accidentally demonstrating interspecies cooperation on a scale the galaxy hasn't seen since the Pax Romana. Fleet Commander Vextai's voice had lost all trace of authority when it crackled through the command center speakers. This is impossible. You're refugees, survivors. You have no fleet, no military capability. Barnabas looked up from his communication console, gray hair framing a face that had seen empires rise and fall. Jonas, you want to handle the diplomatic response, or should I? Jonas stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of navigating galactic politics, with nothing but intelligence and determination. Fleet Commander Vextai, this is Commander Jonas Reeves, diplomatic liaison for the Drayton Station Collective. You are correct that we are refugees and survivors. You are incorrect about what that means. Kess watched the tactical display as more ships dropped out of hyperspace. 47 vessels in the first wave, as Barnabas had reported. But the second wave was already forming, and the third. Human ships that looked like converted cargo haulers and mining vessels, because that's exactly what they were. You see, Commander, Jonas continued, his voice taking on the careful cadence of someone explaining a complex concept to a slower student. When you scatter a technological species across the galaxy and force them to rebuild from salvage and desperation, you accidentally create something that has never existed before. The first human ship to reach the combat zone looked like exactly what it was. A converted cargo hauler. Blocky, ugly, efficient. The kind of vessel you'd use to transport supplies between settlements. The Velkash flagship opened fire on it immediately. The energy beams struck the cargo hauler's hull and scattered harmlessly. What had looked like standard civilian plating was actually a composite of materials that no military engineer had ever considered using together. Ceramics designed for atmospheric entry, metals salvaged from alien wrecks, carbon fibers woven by children who'd learned to make something from nothing. Maya's voice carried professional fascination as she analyzed the engagement. The ablative layers are working exactly as modeled. The Velkash weapons are designed for standard military composites, not adaptive materials. The cargo hauler's response was equally unexpected. Instead of energy weapons or missile launchers, it deployed something that looked like industrial mining equipment. The Velkash flagship discovered that mining charges designed to crack asteroids could do interesting things to warship hulls. The explosion bloomed like a metallic flower against the black, its petals of shattered hull plating catching starlight as they tumbled away into the void. Emergency, lights strobed across the flagship's broken superstructure, painting the battle scene in alternating crimson and amber, while atmosphere vented from the wounds in visible streams of crystallizing vapor. Kess felt the vibration through Drayton Station's deck plating as more human ships engaged, each one a testament to 20 years of desperate ingenuity. A converted passenger liner spun lazily through the Velkash formation, its civilian hull bristling with improvised weapon mounts that had been disguised as atmospheric processing equipment. The liner's movements were almost balletic, a dance of survival choreographed by people who had learned that grace under pressure was the difference between life and death in the unforgiving mathematics of orbital mechanics. What happens, Jonas continued conversationally, is that you create a species that treats the vacuum of space like a natural habitat, views impossible odds as standard operating procedure, and considers jury-rigged equipment to be the height of sophisticated engineering. Fleet Commander Vextai was screaming orders now, but his formation was already coming apart. The Velkash were disciplined soldiers, but they'd trained to fight other militaries. Predictable enemies with standard tactics and conventional weapons. They'd never faced opponents who treated the entire concept of impossible as a personal challenge. Kess watched through the command center's main viewer as human tactics evolved in real time. Ships that had been designed for cargo transport suddenly demonstrated attack patterns that no military academy had ever taught. Mining vessels became artillery platforms. Atmospheric processors became area denial weapons. And behind it all, connecting every human ship, every settlement, every desperate group of survivors, was the network Maya had built. Not a military command structure, but something more organic, more adaptable. "Maya," Kess said, watching a particularly elegant maneuver that turned a maintenance shuttle into an improvised torpedo, "how long have you been planning this?" Maya's smile carried the satisfaction of a scientist whose theory had just been proven correct. "Remember when you asked me why I was integrating biological neural networks into the communication systems? I told you it was for improved efficiency. It wasn't. Not entirely." Maya gestured at the display showing the battle's progression. "I was modeling human social behavior. How we adapt, how we cooperate, how we solve problems that should be impossible to solve." The Velkash were learning what every predator species eventually learned, but few survived the lesson. Sometimes the prey evolved faster than you did. Barnabas looked up from his console, his weathered face creased with something between pride and amazement. "Kess, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Velkash vessels. But there's more." "More what?" "Intelligence reports. The Velkash weren't just raiding human settlements. They were gathering data, biological samples, technological specifications, cultural analysis." Barnabas paused, his expression growing grave. "Someone hired them to find out what we'd become." Jonas moved to the strategic display, his diplomatic training evident in how quickly he grasped the implications. This wasn't a random attack. Someone in the galactic community is concerned about human development, concerned enough to hire the Velkash hegemony to conduct reconnaissance in force. Maya's face went pale as she processed the data flowing through her network. If that's true, then this battle isn't an ending. It's an announcement. The weight of those words settled over the command center like the artificial gravity they'd all learned to trust despite its impermanence. Through the viewports, the debris field painted constellations of human triumph against the star-scattered dark. Each piece of wreckage a punctuation mark in a sentence the galaxy was only beginning to read. The Velkash ships hung motionless in the void, not destroyed, but transformed into something entirely different from what they'd been when they arrived. Proof that human hands could reshape anything, given time and necessity. Kess watched a maintenance pod drift past the viewport, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts, and painted with the kind of careful repairs that spoke of years spent in the spaces between worlds. Inside, she knew, would be someone like her, young, born to vacuum and starlight, raised on recycled air and the constant whisper of life support systems. Someone who had learned to see opportunity where others saw only the endless dark. Kess felt something cold settle in her stomach. For 20 years, humans had rebuilt in obscurity, scattered across the galaxy's edge, ignored by the species that had destroyed their homeworld. But if someone was paying attention, if someone was worried enough to send warships, the galaxy's about to discover that the children of Earth aren't refugees anymore, she said quietly. Fleet Commander Vextai's final transmission came 2 hours later, broadcast on all frequencies. His voice carried the defeated tone of someone who had just learned that everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. "We surrender, we request terms, and we request immediate diplomatic contact with human leadership." The aftermath of the battle painted space around Drayton Station in the debris of preconceptions. Velkash ships drifted powerless, their crews either unconscious from atmospheric contamination or overwhelmed by tactics they had never imagined possible. Human vessels moved among the wreckage with the practiced efficiency of scavengers who had learned to waste nothing. Their crews already adapting Velkash technology for purposes its designers had never intended. Kes stood in the observation lounge, watching human salvage teams work alongside Cathurian technical specialists and Mordek engineers. Species that had viewed humans as useful but ultimately limited were discovering that limitation was a concept humans had long since abandoned. Jonas appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee, synthesized from organic compounds they'd learned to extract from asteroid minerals. "The Galactic Council is demanding immediate hearings," he said, offering her one of the cups. 7 species have filed formal complaints about unauthorized human military development. And 12 other species have requested trade agreements. The Antaran Council wants to establish a permanent embassy. The Zephyrian Collective is offering mutual defense pacts. Jonas smiled, the expression carrying years of careful political maneuvering finally paying dividends. It seems the galaxy is discovering that underestimating humans might not be the wisest long-term strategy. Maya joined them, her lab coat now clean, but her eyes bright with the kind of exhaustion that came from watching impossible theories become successful reality. "The network analysis is complete," she said. "We just coordinated the actions of over 300,000 individuals across 17 star systems in real time. No central command structure, no military hierarchy, just cooperation. Adaptive cooperation," Kes corrected. "The kind that emerges when you spend 20 years learning that survival depends on making something from nothing." Barnabas approached, his communication equipment finally quiet after hours of coordinating surrender negotiations and diplomatic contact requests. "There's something else," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "The intelligence we recovered from the Velkash ships, the species that hired them." He paused, looking out at the starfield where human ships continued their patient work of turning yesterday's enemies into tomorrow's resources. It was the Terran Colonial Authority. The silence that followed carried the weight of revelation. The TCA, the human government that had fled Earth's destruction, that had established themselves in the galaxy's core, that had spent 20 years building political influence while the scattered refugees struggled to survive. "They were afraid of us," Maya said quietly. "The legitimate government was afraid of what the refugees might become." Jonas set down his coffee cup, his diplomatic training evident in how carefully he controlled his expression. "The TCA has spent 2 decades positioning themselves as the true representatives of humanity. They've built their political influence on the tragedy of Earth's destruction and the narrative of human victimhood. And we just proved that narrative false," Kes said. "We proved that the scattered children of Earth didn't just survive, we evolved." Through the observation lounge's viewport, she could see the truth of her words. Human ships moved with predatory grace, their crews demonstrating capabilities that no one, including themselves, had fully understood until today. The void had taught them lessons that no planetary species could comprehend. "The galaxy thought they were doing us a favor when they scattered us," Maya said, her voice carrying the wonder of someone who had just watched 20 years of careful preparation bear fruit. "They thought they were preventing humans from becoming a threat again. Instead," Barnabas added, his gray eyes reflecting starlight, "they created something entirely new, a species that doesn't need a homeworld, because we learned to make our home in the spaces between stars." Kes pressed her palm against the transparent aluminum, feeling the vibration of the station's life support systems. The mechanical heartbeat that had lulled her to sleep every night of her life, that had taught her to hear opportunity where others heard only the hum of survival. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonas moved to stand beside her, his reflection ghost-like in the viewport. "Now we have choices we've never had before. The galaxy is offering us recognition trade agreements, military alliances. The TCA is demanding that we acknowledge their authority and submit to colonial administration. And we're about to demonstrate that the children of the void don't submit to anyone. Maya's smile carried the satisfaction of someone whose greatest experiment had exceeded all expectations. The network protocols I developed weren't just for crisis response. They're adaptive, evolutionary. Every challenge we face makes the system stronger, more sophisticated. You built us a nervous system, Kes realized, a way for every human settlement to learn from every other human experience in real time. More than that, Maya gestured at the display showing the continuing network activity. I built us a future. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, we won't just respond as individual settlements or ships. We'll respond as a single adaptive organism that happens to be distributed across 17 star systems. Barnabas nodded slowly, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had watched one civilization end and another begin. The TCA represents what humans were. We represent what humans became when they were forced to adapt to the impossible. Through the comm system, Kes could hear the quiet chatter of human voices coordinating activities across the network. Not the rigid command structure of a military, but the organic conversation of a family working together toward common goals. The galaxy's about to learn, she said quietly, that when you force a technological species to evolve in the dark between stars, you don't get refugees. You get something that can survive anywhere, build from nothing, and adapt to anything. The stars beyond the viewport seemed to pulse with new meaning, each distant point of light representing not just a sun, but a possibility. Somewhere out there, on worlds circling those stars, human settlements were receiving the signal. Children who had never breathed unfiltered air were looking up from their workstations, understanding for the first time that they were not alone, not scattered, not broken. They were connected. They were strong. They were the future that Earth's destruction had accidentally created. The network hummed beneath their feet, through the station's bones, carrying voices and data and dreams across distances that should have been impossible to bridge. But humans had never accepted impossible as a final answer. They had learned to make something from nothing, hope from desperation, unity from the vast dark between the worlds. Jonas raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To the children of the void. To the children of the void, Maya echoed. Barnabas joined them, his weathered hands steady despite everything they'd witnessed. And to the galaxy that's about to discover what humans become when you give them 20 years to figure out how to turn impossible into inevitable. Outside, human ships continued their work, efficient and relentless, building, adapting, surviving, preparing for whatever came next with the patience of a species that had learned to make something from nothing. The void had taught them well, and now it was time for the galaxy to learn those lessons. As Kes watched the stars beyond the viewport, she felt the subtle vibration through the station's hull that meant more ships were arriving. Human ships, bringing news from across the network, stories of other successes, other adaptations, other demonstrations that the scattered children of Earth had become something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that didn't need permission to exist, acknowledgement to thrive, or homeworlds to call their own. Something that had learned to find opportunity in the spaces where others saw only emptiness, and to build communities in the dark between the stars. The children of the void were finally ready to show the galaxy what they had become. And trust me, Kes thought, watching the network light's pulse with the shared heartbeat of humanity's new future, they're not going to like the answer.